Good evening. Today I wanted to talk to y'all about something that plays off of what I talked about last week, and that is the food that we feed our children. So last week I talked to y'all about what we went through as a family as far as my son getting really sick because of some of the things he was predisposed to and how those predispositions interacted with the food that we were giving him, even though we were really diligent. And so that's why I think this topic is really important, because many parents are really intentional about what they feed their kids, or they think that since we're doing well in this area, we can kind of let them eat this in that area. But there's a lot of misinformation out there about what is good for our children, how much of that thing is good, what's acceptable, and things like that. And some of these ingredients in foods may surprise you. And some of these things are probably really straightforward. But I'd like to tell y'all some of the things that we learned going through the program that we did with him, because we did this homeopathic program to heal his gut, which was the source of all his problems, and with that, all the symptoms that were coming out of that healed as well. Part of that program, it was a 5.5-month program that extended to almost a year, was an elimination diet. So when they tested him, they figured out what he was reacting to on a cellular level, like what was causing inflammation, what wasn't he digesting well. And he was taken off of those foods for a minimum of 8 weeks up to the entire program. So some of those foods he was off of for a really long time. And that was just a piece of that program. While he was taking off of the foods, then we put things into his body to help bring that inflammation down, heal the gut lining, so that when we reintroduced them, he was able to process them well and normally. But I just learned so much through doing that now there are things that we never put back into his diet. We never, reintroduce some of those foods, because I learned for one, they're not necessary, and that we might actually end up with the same issue with the gut issue if we introduce those foods back in. So the homeopathic doctor was really helpful with all that, but then just doing a lot of my own research and seeing when we took that food out, that symptom went away, and when we put it back in, we saw that symptom, things like that. So I wanted to go through some really common foods or ingredients, and how they kind of sneak into the diet sometimes, and why we shouldn't give our kids that, or why we should be very diligent about restricting them maybe. And of course that's different for every family, and I do want to make a note that we did kind of get off all those foods at once, because we were kind of in a situation where we needed to do something and get into this program quickly. But it was very overwhelming to learn to cook differently and to buy things differently and learn how to do that cheaply. So I totally get that it's really overwhelming to talk about diet, especially when you have children who are picky eaters, which I did and still do. So I'm totally not trying to put pressure on people to just change everything all at once, because that's very hard to do. As a PT, I remember, before I had kids, telling parents, what all the ideals were. Like, yes, this is how much tummy time your baby should be getting, or this and that. And now as a mom, I'm like, wow, it's great to know the ideal, but you also have to live life and, get your children fed and things like that. So I would encourage you, as you're learning things like I learned them going through that, to try not to be overwhelmed by it, but to be open to it, and maybe pick one thing to change a month, or every grocery trip you're going to change one thing comes off the grocery list and doesn't come back on, or something like that. Learn to cook with one new ingredient or whatever. That's what I would suggest, because it is overwhelming, and then you feel like you need to throw out the whole pantry, and that's expensive. So if anyone ever needs practical help with how to cook differently or change kids over, we've probably done it all. So we'd be happy to, my husband and I would be happy to, talk to y'all individually. But I wanted to jump in and talk to you about some of these. One more thing before we do that. I think it's important that as moms buying the groceries and things like that, that we don't rely on marketing. If something says it's organic, most of the ingredients might be organic, but some of those ingredients, like say the oils they use or the types of sugars, still may not be the best. So we can't rely on marketing. And then if you're like me and you Google things sometimes, like, is glyphosate okay? Is glyphosate safe? Which is what is in typically the Roundup or the herbicides and the desiccants that they put on our wheat, right? I looked that up. Well, the EPA says, yeah, it's fine. But we need to be asking, okay, so government agencies say that that ingredient is fine to ingest. What we need to be asking though is how much of that ingredient is okay to ingest, and is it okay for who to ingest? A full-grown adult is different than a child. So if someone just says that ingredient is fine, we need to be asking more questions. Also, especially when it's something like a chemical, we need to be looking at the study that they used and see what they say the threshold is. So one serving, whatever they would, measure glyphosate in, wasn't harmful in this study. But how much conventional wheat with glyphosate in it are we consuming every day? Or is your baby consuming, your toddler consuming, right? So we have to remember that, yes, while something might be deemed safe, as in it's not going to kill you, you might be reaching your child's threshold, and it might be different than a study you read or something like that. So we can't just rely on that. We have to ask a lot more questions when it comes to what's safe and what's not safe. Just because it's allowed in the American diet doesn't mean that it's the best thing for us to be eating. And toxic load is something that we all need to be aware of too, because our bodies naturally get rid of toxins, whether it's in our air or in our food or whatever. But when something isn't working well with our gut lining, like I talked about last week, then we're not able to properly eliminate those toxins, and they build up. They build up in the liver, they come out through our skin. There's a lot of symptoms that can let you know that you or your child's toxic load is reached, the capacity is reached. So while we may not be giving our children food dye, are we giving our children, even unknowingly, like high fructose corn syrup and dairy with antibiotics in it, and wheat with glyphosate in it, all in the same day, right? Each of those things might not be horrible for your child. They might be able to handle one of those, but maybe not 3 in a day. Like, our children have a toxic load that we have to keep in mind. And they may not be allergic to a food. An allergy is a true allergy would be like my child's exposed to it and they have an intense reaction the first time and every time. And so we think it's okay then to let our children eat that food. But that's what makes things like this sneaky, is because no, they're not allergic to it, but they still may not be processing it well. So they might have been fine for 2 months eating eggs, and then all of a sudden they start getting breakouts. That's because they've reached their toxic load, and their body can no longer, there's so much of that food built up in the system, maybe rotting in the gut because they can't expel it well enough, that now they've reached that capacity. So sometimes you kind of have to be an investigator and be willing to take foods out, or learn about, go back and look at the quality of the food to see if maybe that's what's going on. So I wanted to start with wheat products, which I already kind of mentioned. That's because that's a very prevalent product, right? Wheat products. So any bread product, any pasta product, and even egg noodles, right? Like, they have pasta or wheat in it, and flour. So if you're baking on your own. And if we go out to a restaurant, we're probably, consuming conventional wheat products. And conventional wheat here in America is grown from genetically modified wheat, or else you can't grow that much of it. Wheat, unhybridized wheat, which there's really only 2 kinds in the world left that are unhybridized, are really finicky. So they had to really genetically modify the wheat in order to stand up against the wind, in order for the small seeds not to just blow away, in order for the seeds to be bigger. They're genetically modified. Because they're genetically modified, they're not as naturally resistant to pests and things like that. So they created a specific herbicide and desiccant for commercially grown wheat in America. And the way that they treat the wheat fields is literally to kind of flood them with a Roundup solution. Roundup is a brand, but with a herbicide or whatever. And it sinks down into the root system, and that entire wheat berry is infused with the poison, with the Roundup. Roundup, you know, now they'll say Roundup's perfectly safe because there were all these lawsuits from people doing using Roundup in their yards, so now it doesn't bother anyone. No, what they did is they changed the concentration so they could say they fixed something, but again, how much of it are we consuming? That's what's important. So a lot of people don't react well to glyphosate, which isn't surprising because it's a poison, but it's in the wheat. So no, you might not respond to it the first time, but you don't want that to build up in your system. And you do not have to be allergic to gluten or even gluten sensitive to have an issue with glyphosate. Some people might think they are gluten sensitive, and they're not. If they were to try, not everyone, but some people, if they were to try truly organic flour that hasn't been treated at all, and especially flour like einkorn or emmer that hasn't been hybridized at all, they may find they don't respond to it. That was what was happening in our family. So my son was off of wheat products for the entire program because he was so reactive to it. But now when we introduced him back to gluten and wheat, we used einkorn flour. So einkorn is unhybridized. Its genetic structure is just like it was, 1,000 years ago, and so it's typically not treated with anything. It is more finicky. It is made in smaller batches. It comes from Europe, which dousing their fields in Roundup is not allowed in Europe. That should tell us another thing. So we introduced a naturally kind of organic, unhybridized flour into his diet, and he was perfectly fine. And this is a child who was super reactive to gluten before we made that change. So, so that would be my alternative suggestion is if you're gluten sensitive, to try an organic flour first, like just Arthur Mill organic flour, all-purpose or something, and bake some things on your own so that you know exactly what's in it, and then you can kind of tease out if you're allergic, if you're actually responding to that. And then einkorn's harder to work with, but it's very rewarding. It actually has vitamins and minerals in it. You know, when we read the Bible and people literally lived off of bread, that sounds weird to us now because we're like, oh, we think about the little plate we learned about in elementary school, right? Where like you're supposed to have this much wheat, and then you get older, you're not, eat your vegetables, don't eat your bread. But actually, wheat back in the day had a lot of B vitamins and a lot of minerals. People actually could live off of bread. It was nutritious. And so flour like einkorn and emmer and other ancient grains, they actually have a mineral profile that you're getting nutrients from that bread. It's not just a filler, and it tastes a lot better. So, and I've had friends who have been off of gluten for years who can eat my einkorn products. That's very rewarding to me. And now we've transitioned to using organic flour at home. So a normal gluten profile, just from white wheat berries and stuff. And our family does well with that as well. So we kind of had to heal our guts. 3 of us have done this program now before we were able to even get back on those good types of grains. So it wasn't that we were allergic or even sensitive to the actual gluten. It was the fact that it was hybridized and treated with chemicals. So I think that's an important distinction to make. If you are allergic to gluten, you've been tested and you know you have celiac, then you're not going to be able to do einkorn, and I don't think emmer either, because they are wheat. They do have gluten in it. But if you're gluten sensitive, you can go to Italy or other countries and have bread and pasta, and because it's not typically hybridized and it's definitely not treated with chemicals, you can enjoy that. That's a pretty common thing that you probably know if you're gluten sensitive. But also, if you're sensitive to gluten and you find that organic flour works for you, our favorite bread is Dave's Killer Bread, and you can get that at Publix or even just like discount bread stores. We found it. Our local Pick and Save has it. We get our pasta, like our einkorn pasta, and from Thrive Market, and we get our einkorn flour from either Thrive Market. The brand is called Jovial. They make einkorn products, and they have their own farms out in Italy and stuff where they make their flour. So you can get the einkorn flour off of Amazon or Thrive Market or Azure Standard. They carry Jovial and their own, they mill their own einkorn flour too. Azure Standard is a co-op up in Washington, but they do drops all over the country. So you shop throughout the month, and then they are like, okay, on this day and time, we're going to be at that certain church parking lot, and you get there, you help unload the truck for everyone, and you take your groceries home. And some things don't make it well. I'm in Florida, so not everything makes it well from Washington. Most of it does. Everything makes it well. Some things are, since they're already a few days old. But getting things like einkorn flour in bulk and oats in bulk and stuff is really cool. So I'll put a link to Azure Standard down there. But that's a good alternative for gluten sensitive people. And then if you're gluten free, like my daughter's gluten free right now because she's actually doing this homeopathic program, you can make the bread. I don't have the capacity to make both kinds of bread, or really any kind of bread some weeks. So we use Canyon House, the brand Canyon House, for her gluten-free bread. And that's even at Pick and Save, and you can find that at Publix. And then one-to-one gluten-free flour replacement, like from King's Mill or King Arthur or Bob's Red Mill, is really good as well. So that's the first product that I think is probably one of the hardest to take out of children's diets, but probably one of the ones that's affecting the kids the most are wheat products. For all intents and purposes, when we go to restaurants, we're gluten-free and dairy-free. And that's just because I know too much. So at home, we're not gluten-free, dairy-free, but when we're out in the world, we are. My son, 3 years out of the program, we're dabbling in letting him, go to a pizza party and have a slice of pizza. And it's not just because we're neurotic, it's because he was so reactive to those things. And it's crazy because he is now able to do that, but we don't do that as a rule. So the second type of food that I wanted to talk about was meat and dairy products. And commercial meat and dairy products too come from cows that are treated with antibiotics. And yes, we get a very small dose of that antibiotic that comes through the meat, but then we have to ask ourselves, how much of the meat are we eating, and how small is our child? And we just because they say that it's safe, they might be saying a certain serving size is safe. And how much are we okay with playing with that? Because we know that the more antibiotics we get in our system, the more resistant we are. Those antibiotics are killing off good bacteria in our gut, and that's making way for bad bacteria to proliferate in the gut and wrecking our absorption of nutrients. So for us, it's not worth it. And, when we go out to restaurants, we usually do chicken to stay away from that. Sometimes I just keep a calendar in my head, and I try to make it really far in between that we get beef from restaurants and stuff because of the level of antibiotics in it. The reason cows are typically treated with antibiotics is because they're given growth hormones, and that's simply for productivity. But if you give a cow growth hormones, and they produce more milk, they're more, if it's a dairy cow, then they're more prone to getting mastitis and things like that. So you're giving them antibiotics for that to help them live longer and get the productivity out of them. And then for the meat cows, they're given growth hormones, so they'll bulk up, and then they're more prone to diseases because you've messed with their hormones, so they give them antibiotics. Also, conventionally raised cows are fed grain, which it's not natural for them to have grain 100% of the time. But grain fattens them up more quickly, and it's cheaper. So then let's go back to the wheat issue. Most of that grain is genetically modified to be produced in bulk and is treated with chemicals. So now we're eating animals who are eating the wheat that we don't want to be eating. So that's another way that we're getting glyphosate and GMO products and stuff, is through the conventional meat. So again, we're thinking about our kids' toxic load in the cup, the little cup that they have, and we're just, you know, if we're not careful, we're just like loading the cup up. So where was I with the growth hormones? So the growth hormones that are in the cows also, you know, microscopically are entering our children's bodies, and there reaches a capacity where it starts to affect their hormones. And we know that children approaching puberty, a lot of them are approaching puberty earlier, and a lot of people are saying, well, they're responding to the hormones in the food, which is I believe true, just because if you look at timelines of when weird things are happening and then when things are happening in our food supply, you can't really argue with that. And then also, not to get too far into it, there's a lot of environmental toxins that actually affect children's hormones as well. So it's not just what you're taking in. There's a lot of chemicals that children breathe in or absorb through their skin that actually act as hormone disruptors. So I think the combination of those two things is what we're seeing with kids with the hormone issues. And children can have hormonal imbalances as well. It doesn't start at puberty, which I think is kind of a misconception. When I heard that, I was even like, oh, it's not time for them to be hormonal. But children can have hormone issues as well. So, yes, some alternatives to just conventional meat at the store. I'm talking really about beef. Chickens, they say it's illegal for them to have antibiotics. They still get, you know, a lot of food they're not supposed to get, so you get the GMO issue. So, but really I'm talking about beef. You can get grass-fed beef at the store, and it is really expensive. I would suggest, because I think pretty much anywhere you can do this, is to find a local butcher and reserve a cow. That's what we've done for the last few years, and it's worked really well. And that way you know what they're being fed, you know where they're being processed, and in the past, the 3 years that we've done it now, the grass-fed beef has come out at half the cost of what you would pay for grass-fed beef at the store. So every ranch and processor will be different, but that's what we've experienced. So we actually eat a lot of beef, and we've gotten up to half a cow for our family of 4, and it will last us the year. So that's really fun. And I would say too that a lot of ranches are grass-fed, grain-finished, and that might deter a lot of people because everyone wants like 100% grass-fed, but actually it's been natural for as long as people have had domesticated cows. They've followed the way that like the bison and the cows in the wild would have done it, and they actually do ingest grain more toward winter time to put on fat to make it through winter. So it's actually really natural for cows to get some grain. They would actually do that in the wild to a point. So we don't technically worry about grass-fed, grain-finished. It does help to put on weight right at the end, but that's not actually super abnormal. If you want to get nitpicky, you'll look at the type of grain they're getting. But yeah, so that's a good alternative to that, and it saves a lot of money. An alternative to the milk, because I think I mentioned, you know, the milk is going to have the same issues with the antibiotics and the hormones that are in it. Before I get to the alternatives, the other issue that we run into with milk and children not being able to break it down well and absorb it well and digest it well is that it's pasteurized. It's pasteurized in order to kill bacteria like E. coli, or, you know, things that would grow in the milk. Drinking raw milk is everyone's personal choice, but I'll give you the history on that. So before milk became commercialized, people got milk from their cow or from a local cow, and it was small batch essentially. So when dairy cows started becoming commercialized, there was no way to keep those cows well. You couldn't watch every single cow and catch every case of mastitis or, you know, whatever, cows getting infections. So inevitably milk would get tainted every now and then, and people would get really sick. But they weren't going to stop commercializing the milk, so they just pasteurized the milk. It was a great way to keep people from getting sick if you were into the commercialization of the milk. So But what that pasteurization also does is it kills the enzymes in the milk. It kills the bacteria, but it kills the enzymes. And the enzyme lactase is what breaks down the sugar lactose. So if we're drinking that that milk with the lactose, but we don't have the enzyme in it to help break it down, our body has to work a lot harder to break down those molecules in the milk. Milk's not homogenized naturally; it's separated. So, just long story short, it is harder to digest. But good quality milk, even, is your body has to work to digest it. But if it is raw and it has its lactase enzymes intact, it digests much more easily. Plus, it's got a lot of the nutrients still intact. So pasteurized milk is just not as nutritious, even if it's whole milk. So that is the issue with the pasteurization. It's just questionable how much you're getting from it. And if the body, especially young children whose digestive systems are not mature yet, if they're getting this pasteurized milk that is void of those enzymes that help break it down and their bodies cannot break it down, that milk sits in the gut. And that's gross because it'd be like milk sitting out. Not exactly, but it's sitting in there and it can disrupt the flora in the gut wall. It can disrupt the bacteria in there. So some alternatives to pasteurized milk would obviously be raw milk. And our family, to be transparent, is just kind of starting the raw milk journey. We don't even drink like raw milk from the cup. We have it to cook with, things like that, and not even all the time because I've gotten so used to plant-based milk. But the reason I made that big jump, it was a big jump for me, the jump to raw milk, is because I personally know the farmers. I see their cows often, and they're the most beautiful, healthy cows. I know that the farmers drink this milk and would know very quickly if there was something wrong with their cow. And I am very confident that they wouldn't be milking her and selling that milk. So I would definitely make sure that you are 1,000% comfortable with where the raw milk is coming from. But the world's lived on raw milk forever before whenever Louis Pasteur came up with the pasteurization, and the years before that when it was commercialized. It's just very natural. So it's not everyone's thing. Like I said, we're just starting that journey as well, but just make sure you know where it's coming from because it's not common practice to take care of cows anymore, so make sure they're doing a good job. But if you still have issues with cow's milk, raw cow's milk, then I would look into raw goat milk. And that is because I just learned this weekend because we went to this conference on homesteading and stuff, and it was super cool. But if you look at the size of a cow and the size of a goat, people are much closer to the size of a goat. So the fat content, the ratio of vitamins and minerals, the size of the fat molecules in goat's milk is a lot more similar to a human's breast milk. And therefore, it's a lot simpler for a human to digest goat's milk. And that is why a lot of moms use goat milk for their babies when they can't, well, back in the day when they didn't have commercial formula and they couldn't nurse. I remember my great-grandma did that, for her last baby. For some reason, couldn't nurse, and that's what he drank was goat's milk. So I guess they knew that. We think now like, oh, we have all this science, we know all these new things, but moms have been doing that forever. But yes, goat's milk is much closer to the profile of human milk because we're closer to the same size. Cow's milk has these huge fat molecules because they're very big animals and their babies are big to start out with. So it's naturally harder for humans to digest. So if you're even having issues with raw cow's milk, then maybe you could try the raw dairy goat's milk. Again, we also drink the goat's milk because we absolutely know the farmers and we see their goats in person and we know that they drink and use their goat milk. So I know that that's like a safeguard to me that it's a local farm that does it themselves. And then finally, if you're actually lactose intolerant, a lot of people think they are, but if they try raw, they can do it. That just means you're sensitive. You're not allergic. So if you're actually unable to, your body doesn't have any way deal with that lactose and you can't do milk in any way, then I would suggest plant-based milk, like almond or cashew or oat or rice. But we did that during my son's program when he couldn't have dairy, which he was getting a lot of milk. And we were getting organic milk, but it was still pasteurized, so he wasn't able to absorb it and digest it. So I would just buy the really expensive plant-based milk from the store. It's expensive and it's just not that good for you. It's got a lot of preservatives in it to make it last. There's been recalls about plant-based milks lately, and so I would recommend, if you're not able to do dairy at all and you want to do that, it is so easy with a machine. You have to invest a little bit to make your own plant-based milk. So I'll put a link to the one that we use. My favorite milk to make is cashew milk because it's very creamy and it is very easy. Oat milk is a close second because of how easy it is, but cashew milk is the easiest. And so because we were off of dairy for so long, we totally made back the money in investing in the machine to do that. So I'll put a link there for that. And then it's the milk per unit price is so much cheaper to make it yourself. So if you're having an issue with dairy or you're trying to eliminate it from your diet for a while and you want to do something plant-based, then those are some good options. So cheese and butter, I would make sure it's grass-fed and the cheese is real, not plastic. And that's easy to see with the ingredients. It should have as little ingredients as possible, or else it doesn't really have dairy in it anyway. So yes, dairy was something that my kids were taken off of for the entire 22 weeks of their homeopathic program, just like wheat, because they were so reactive to it. It was causing so much inflammation in their body, those two ingredients. So that makes me wonder, how much are other kids dealing with that? How many other children are reacting to the wheat and the dairy that they're ingesting multiple times a day? And I didn't even know that until we kind of hit capacity and got tested for that. So it's something that I would really consider, and maybe just experiment with and change the product or take it out of the diet and see what changes, because you might be surprised at how reactive your kids are to the wheat and dairy that they're getting, even if you think it's good. Because to go back to that a little bit, I was giving my son organic milk, mostly organic. I wouldn't even say that. I don't think I was into organic wheat at the time. It was more, because I can't even think of what the brand was, but I was doing whole wheat because I thought that was better, but it wasn't. So that's what I would suggest. And getting them back on some sort of cheese or butter is really good because kids need that fat. Fat is such a bad word, to some people, but children need fat. They're developing their nervous system, and their nervous system is just coated with myelin that's just fat. So good quality fat is extremely important. That's why we need to not do skim milk. A lot of parents think they're making a healthy choice doing skim milk because that's what they're told by people, but that takes the fat out of the milk, and it's a chemical process that does that. So it's just a really fake product that is, at the least, it's not giving your child anything, and at the most, it's just introducing really hard to digest components. So I wouldn't give skim milk to children. If you're going to give them dairy products, half the benefit of that is the fat they're getting, and children need a lot of good fat. And when we did this program and we took our kids off of dairy, my husband naturally didn't get as much dairy, and we didn't really, at first it was kind of like solidarity, we're gonna eat like the kids, and then we were like, no, I literally like starved to death because I was just working so hard to feed them with these alternative foods. I was just like not eating. It was horrible. So it was like, no, we're just gonna put our oxygen mask on and eat real food and get the kids through this program or whatever. But my husband, he didn't get as much dairy, just kind of naturally through this process. And the huge antibiotic treated sinus infection that he got every year around the same time, he battled horrible allergies here, which you wouldn't think is food, you would think is environmental. It went away. He's gone, I guess, 2 years now without having a sinus infection that he needed antibiotics for. And he swore it was the dairy. And we've tested it since then, because we'll go somewhere and he'll get a cheeseburger, he'll get a pizza, or, you know, ice cream. Oh, it was really bad with ice cream. And the next day, it's like he has a cold, a head cold. It's so weird. And he was like, it is the dairy. So anyway, that's a sneaky symptom. You know, like I told you, our son was treated Claritin every single day for his allergies. Like, oh, what's he allergic to? And that really cleared up. And it was probably related. We did everything at the same time, but we could definitely tell with my husband that it was the dairy. So if you have seasonal allergies that you can't get under control, consider dairy. Eggs is the third ingredient that I want to talk about, because a lot of people know they're allergic to egg, and you can test for that with a skin prick. You can't test for all foods with a skin prick. You usually need blood work to do that, but eggs you can test with a skin prick. So a lot of people know if they're allergic to it. But eggs can be sneaky because they're baked into things, and it's kind of the same issue as the meat. Conventional eggs are just raised differently. The chickens are fed differently, and that changes the content and the components of the egg, and then we react to it because it's not natural what they're being fed and things like that. So there's a difference. I'll go back and say I had an egg sensitivity. I didn't have an allergic reaction every time I ate an egg, but if I started eating eggs every day, and I slowly developed the worst skin issue. Just this acne-looking dermatitis, and it got so bad that I would get off. I was like, maybe it's the egg. I'd get off of it. In 3 weeks, it would be gone. I would have an egg, and it would come back the next day. I had sensitized to it so much, it was almost like I was having an allergy. And so I just kind of stopped eating eggs. Well, then I got pregnant with my first baby, Joel, the one with all the health issues, the gut issues, and all I did was crave eggs. So I would go by McDonald's like multiple times a week, and I knew better than to eat the meat at that point, you know, for all these reasons, the sausage with the nitrates and nitrites that we'll talk about, but I would just get a biscuit with egg and cheese like multiple times a week. So everything I just said, the wheat, the dairy, and the egg, and my skin was so bad, but it's like I didn't even care because I craved it so much. Y'all know how that is if you're a mom. And my son was so sensitive to egg. I didn't introduce it to him for quite a while because the recommendation then, and for a lot of people still, is to wait till 1 to do allergen foods, to introduce high allergen foods, which I'll talk about later because we're doing the opposite with my son now. But yes, I gave him eggs a little after a year old, and he just had a hive reaction. And so I just didn't give it to him. But they're so healthy for babies, for kids. Like eggs, good quality eggs, again, are such a good source of fat and cholesterol. And yes, kids and people need fat and cholesterol. We'll talk about why they don't handle fat and cholesterol very well. But I found that I could eat organic eggs. I would react with my skin issue when I had conventional eggs or eggs at a restaurant. But if they were organic eggs, you know, I shelled out for organic eggs at the store, I didn't react. So I guess the only thing I could think of from that is that they were fed differently. So I was sensitive to whatever grain, treated grain that the chickens were eating, because that's really the only difference I could think of. So I could do organic eggs, but my son, he had said he wouldn't even taste egg after that first time. 'Cause I wonder if it gave him a stomach ache too or something. So if you have an issue with egg, I would encourage you to try organic eggs. And there is a difference between organic and free range. I found that out because I bought free range eggs in the beautiful package and stuff, and I still reacted. I was like, oh man, and then I realized it was free range. And then when I looked into that, free range can mean that they have a run, you know, that open area outside their pen that's like 12 by 12, which we have chickens. That's a fairly small area depending on how many chickens you have. So free ranging doesn't always mean what you think it means, that they have full access to beautiful lush grass and things like that. They probably they're allowed to say free range if they're outside for a certain number of hours a day. It doesn't mean they're not still getting grain, you know, conventional grain food and stuff like that, or things that are hard for them to digest. So if you're having the issue, make sure that you're actually getting organic and not just free range eggs. And the alternative is obviously to get them locally. They're usually a bit cheaper to get them locally, and if you if you know them well enough to ask, you know, are they truly free ranging? Do they have, what kind of, you know, feed do they get? Or get chickens. That's what we did. We got chickens so we could feed them exactly what we wanted. And so we've had issues, you know, with just normal chicken stuff and getting the right infrastructure for them and all that, but it's really fun, and I can feel good. If I feel like the chickens, you know, got into a field I didn't like them in, we don't eat their eggs for a while. You know, we can kind of control that. I will say though, after we did the gut program and healed it, I can go somewhere to a restaurant and have the occasional egg, conventional egg, I'm assuming, and not react. All of us can. So that's really cool. Like, it goes to show you it's more about the state of your gut sometimes than the actual food. And then it's a cycle. If you get too much bad food, you got the gut issue, then you're really going to react to the bad food. But if you can heal the gut issue, you can kind of live a normal life and have some of those foods out and about to a point, but it's got to be an exception to the rule. It can't be the rule, or you're going to end up with the more of the gut issues. So that's the eggs. The fourth one is fruits and vegetables, which I think most people are kind of familiar with, but it's just so sneaky. When something's organic, you would hope that it is truly organic, but I would really look at the source. The supermarket organic isn't probably what you think of as truly organic. It probably just means that they use some sort of chemical that was organic enough, essentially. So it depends on how far you want to go with that. One thing that you can use, I'll put a link to, is the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So some things are labeled organic and marked up so that crunchy people will buy them, but it doesn't matter whatsoever if it's organic or not, because maybe it has a very thick outer coating, or maybe they don't use pesticides at all on them and they just call it organic for another reason. So there's certain fruits and vegetables that the organic label doesn't matter for whatever reason, and those would be the Clean 15. So don't get trapped into paying more money for those. But then there's the Dirty Dozen, which are the top 12. I don't know if it's the most heavily sprayed or the most popular, because it's obviously not all of them, but 12 fruits or vegetables that it's really important to get them organic if you're worried about that, because they're very porous. It's typically because they're very porous, or they have to be heavily sprayed in order to be mass produced. And again, we're thinking of our children as having this cup, and this toxic cup, and little by little we're adding to that toxic load in the cup, right? So we don't want to slowly, you know, just be exposing them to these pesticides. We really want to, whenever we can, we want to be following kind of those guidelines and getting organic things when we need to. And of course, getting them locally is not always cheaper, but it's safer, because if a local, like where we get our local stuff, when they tell me it's organic, I trust that it's organic. I can see their garden and things like that, you know, and growing it you're on your own. We don't do that yet. That's my goal next year, is to get a garden, but I have not had success with that yet. Also, we order, I think I mentioned, we also order a lot of produce from Azure Standard. Depending on where you are in the country, they're really good with their packaging and all that. It's just that we live so far away from Washington, I can't get everything there and it lasts me the month. But a lot of their produce is really good, even making the really long drive. So, and then that's a very safe place. It's a place that I would trust to give me good quality food and stuff. So we try not to get a lot of our fruits and vegetables from the supermarket, but sometimes we do. We just kind of get a mixture of that. The fifth ingredient, there's only 7. So the fifth ingredient that I think is the trickiest, that flies under the radar the most, but that almost is one of the most important ones, is oils. Like cooking oils, or oils that replace fat content in food. And I think it was, so in Nourishing Traditions, there's like this excerpt from a Mark Twain book between a businessman who essentially came up with canola oil, bragging about how he was essentially like, what's the word? Tricking the population into ingesting this horrible product, but his profits were going to soar. That's essentially what this little excerpt was about. It was really interesting. So it was kind of Mark Twain's way of being like, this is what's going on, guys. So canola oil, I'll just go through some of the popular oils that are not good in any way for our health. Canola oil, rapeseed oil is essentially what canola oil comes from. Vegetable oil in general, cottonseed oil, and those oils are cheap to make, so that's why they're chosen to be mass produced. They're readily available and cheap, but because they're a cheaper product, they're also a lower quality product, and they often go rancid before they're on the shelf. In order to cover up the naturally bad quality and even the rancid qualities, they're treated chemically to mask the smell and the taste, and often they're bleached to mask the color, so you get that nice clear, not murky look of the oil and stuff. And our family, I've tested it out, and we have GI issues like related to canola oil. So that's one of the big health issues. It's one other thing that adds to that toxic load. We wouldn't eat food that's gone bad. So even though the percentage of the oil in the food might be low, it's a food that's gone bad, and it's just adding to the toxic load once again. It's just a commercial thing. And canola oil, that's my most frustrating thing, is because I'm shopping for the family and a product is great except for that. So 90% of the time I put the product back if it has canola oil. And sometimes if it's really far down the ingredient list, meaning it's the content is lower, sometimes it makes it through, but not often. The canola oil thing, and all I've learned about the oils is enough for me. So the oils that are used that are typically okay are sunflower oil, specifically high oleic sunflower oil. It's more stable, and avocado oil and olive oil, and there's a few other ones too. And for cooking purposes, avocado oil is better for high heat. It has a higher heat point. And also we cook a lot with grass-fed beef tallow and grass-fed butter, and we just kind of use that a lot in place of oil, because then you're getting some animal based nutrients in your diet too. So I have a huge bucket of grass-fed beef tallow, and I go through it in about 6 months, and I use it for different things like skin and cooking. So, and it adds flavor, and you're getting some nutrients, you're getting a different nutrients profile in your food. So there's a lot of things you can do besides vegetable oil. We just haven't used vegetable oil for things, even in recipes. I just use olive oil, and maybe people that are good at baking and stuff, maybe that's a no-no, but it always works for us. So, but yes, it's often even in healthy snacks, but I would definitely watch out for things like canola oil. It's in there because it's cheap. It's not good for you at all. For number six is high fructose corn syrup. That's probably easy too, because most foods advertise, one of their selling points is that they don't have high fructose corn syrup. But the history is interesting to me, because sometimes you go back to like the history of where things actually came from, and that's enough for me to not, invest money in it or whatever. So back in the 50s or 60s, as we were coming out of like the Great Depression and things like that, and the war and all that, businesses started trying to commercialize food, and farmers were suffering for it. So the government started subsidizing the farmers because their profit margins were lower. So Monsanto was also introducing genetically modified crops and essentially testing out their products on small farmers. So I don't have many anymore. So the farmers were given incentives to grow certain crops, and corn was one of them. So if everyone was growing corn though, then supply is going to go up and demand is going to go down. And so they ended up with this surplus of corn. In order to bail the farmers out, the government would buy the corn and pay the farmers, but then the government in, I don't know I've always wondered where. I just think of these big silos in Washington, D.C., but essentially the corn was stored, and the government owned the corn, and they had to figure out what to do with the corn. And they started creating products simply to use up the corn that they bought from the farmers, that they had made the farmers grow. And so that is why in the 60s era or whenever, my dates might be a little bit wrong, but that is when cereal was invented, and corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup and things like that. There's a lot of other corn products. I mean, there's corn oil, and I can't think of even all of it. They even used it for non-food items. I can't remember everything, but that's why we have high fructose corn syrup, is it became a sugar replacer because of the excess of corn. And then because there was so much of it, it was cheap. So it was just used in a lot of things. But the fructose and high fructose corn syrup is a simple sugar. And the body has to have sugar. It's best to have natural carb sources, or more natural carb sources that can be broken down over time, in a sustainable way, as opposed to simple sugars like fructose or sucrose or something like that. So fructose is a very simple sugar, and it breaks down in the body very quickly, and it gets stored very quickly, and it stores as fat. So that is why this is a really accepted thing now, that high fructose corn syrup has been linked to obesity in children as well as adults. It's been linked to diabetes because, again, we get that fructose in, our pancreas goes crazy, and then our pancreas desensitizes and our insulin doesn't work well, so we get diabetes. And then also the high fructose corn syrup, just all the simple sugar in the body, has been linked to fatty liver disease, cholesterol issues, and dyslipidemia, which is it has to do with the fats in the body. The body can't process the fats correctly. So then cholesterol and fat started becoming a problem maybe a generation after we have this high fructose corn syrup and these sugar replacers put into the diet, right? Then cholesterol and fat become buzzwords, like they're bad, don't put them in your diet. But if you look back to when that started, it started after all these kind of fake foods and fake sugars got put into the diet. And really, it wasn't, fats and cholesterol have been around forever. I get that there's also a lot of fast food at that time too that wasn't good. But good fat and good cholesterol have always been around. But we were told to stop having any sort of fat and cholesterol. But actually, the high fructose corn syrup has been shown to disable the body's ability to properly store and handle cholesterol and fat. So all cholesterol turns into bad cholesterol in the body of someone that has all that fructose and all those sugar rushes and stuff like that. I just think that's amazing, because now in a good way, we're kind of coming back around and saying, like, no, we need to be eating the eggs, we need to be having the healthy fat in our diet, but only really if we have a healthy body that can do the right things with it. So the high fructose corn syrup obviously is in a lot of children's products, and that's the population that needs it the least, because we're building a body. So it's fairly easy to stay away from that now, but it does sneak up on you. Like, I knew that wasn't a good thing to have in Joel's diet, so he had never had candy or anything like that would have that in it, but it was in his ketchup that he had daily, like with something. He's my kid that will put ketchup on anything, salmon and things like that. So he was getting high fructose corn syrup every day, and I did not even think to look at the ingredients on ketchup. So almost every bottle of organic ketchup I've ever seen does not have high fructose corn syrup in it. So I would watch out for that, because it can be very sneaky. And actually, high fructose corn syrup is banned in many other countries in the world. I don't know how many, so I don't want to say most, but many countries have banned high fructose corn syrup, just like they've banned antibiotics and meat in animals and Roundup in food. That other countries, have never allowed that, or they've outlawed that, but not here in America. So the seventh one I wanted to talk about was food dye. And that's also something that probably all of us know is not good. But I wanted to reiterate it because, again, there was like, there's no way my son's getting food dye. We were, you know, I don't have any mercy. If he's crying about candy, he just didn't get it because I just didn't want him to have all the things that were in it. But he was still getting food dye and things that I didn't even know to look for. And the reason we don't want food dye in babies and children and toddlers is essentially poison. That's just, there's nothing natural about it. It is a chemical that's put in to, you know, make color. And that is one that's an absolute no for us. Like I said, now we're able to dabble with things like a piece of pizza for Joel. That's super fun because he can engage with his friends, you know, eating is social, but we don't do the food dye. And it's too easy nowadays not to do it. And it's linked to ADHD. It's linked to migraine disorders, and it's linked to cancer. And that's just, so it's such an easy thing, I think, to take out of our diets. But places to look for it, anything that has the word color in it. So obviously we know to look for red 40 and yellow 6 and blue whatever. But it was, again, my son, how we got him to eat a lot of food was to put condiments on it. So he'd put ketchup on everything, but he'd also put barbecue sauce on everything. And the barbecue sauce had color in it, caramel color. So after we started this program, I saw that caramel color and I looked it up. It's a mixture of red and just all these other things. Daily, he was getting high fructose corn syrup and food coloring. I just couldn't believe it. So it's also in pickles. Not every brand, but many of the like cheaper brand of pickles have yellow dye in it, I guess to make it more vibrant on the shelf. Cereals, juices, anything with color that's not supposed to be there most likely has food coloring, even if it's not on the label, because manufacturers don't have to put that on the label if it's less than a certain percentage. So you might say, well, if it's such a low percentage, they're not even putting it on the label, why does it matter? Again, our children have a cup and we're just adding to the toxic load. So you kind of have to make the decision about what's worth it and what's not. But there's plenty of candy out there and drinks and everything else that just don't have it in there. But I wanted to point that out because it was making its way into my kids' diet when I was like anal about it not being in there. So those were all the main foods that I wanted to point out because it was just so eye-opening for me to go through that and thinking I was doing a good job. And truly, I was doing the best that I knew to do. I was doing the best with what I had and what I knew. And I'm really big with parents on that because sometimes they'll try to like justify and be like, oh, you know, I feel bad about this. I didn't mean to do that. And it's like, the Lord has grace for us. We do the best with what we know to do at the time. And when we learn something and apply it, then we are doing our job. Like, that's the best that we can do. So I try to have grace for myself in that time and just kind of laugh about it. Yes, I wanted to point out lastly that before my son started this program, the whole homeopathic program, I knew from my friends doing this program that we were going to be asked to take him off of certain foods, and I knew that would be a really big jump. So it was probably a month before we started. We kind of cold turkey took him off of gluten, dairy, high fructose corn syrup, and food dye, the little bit that he was getting or whatever. But a lot of gluten, moderate amount of dairy, and tiny but consistent amounts of the other two. We took him off of those. Before we started the program, I want to say a month later, there was a 25% improvement in his behavior and his regulation. A lot of the other things like his sleeping and digestive issues, of course, took time, but we saw immediate improvement in behavior and regulation, personality and stuff. It blew my mind. And I have to say, I don't know if Josh is still watching this. Josh is 100% supportive of anything I do. Like it's crazy. He is the instigator for the crazy things that I do. But when I told him that we were going to do this program and Joel was going to be like gluten-free and we're going to do it with him, he was like, no, we're not going to be gluten-free people. Because he didn't really understand why people do it. He thought it was a fad because there's a lot of fads out there. So, but of course, you know, he's going to be supportive and we are going through some really hard things and he's like willing to try whatever. So when I took him Joel off of those 4 foods, and he saw that improvement so quickly and so drastically, Josh was on board 100%. And to this day, like I have his full support with like dietary things and all that. Not that he wouldn't be, but it's nice to have husbands on board, especially when you're doing things that are going to cost a little more money or that are going to change your menu, and I know that is a struggle for some people because moms see certain things and they think a certain way, and dads are usually fixers or they have a bigger picture view, and sometimes you're not seeing the exact same thing and you might be at odds about what the solution is. Or they might see barriers that you don't see, and I know that's hard for some parents to get on the same page with something so huge as a diet change. Or they truly, one parent or the other, it doesn't have to be the dad, doesn't have all the background knowledge that you might. And that can be difficult. But I would say just take time to educate one another and just try one or two things. So like I said at the beginning, all that is super overwhelming information maybe, but just try one thing at a time, even one thing a month or one thing a grocery trip, and change just one habit. And it'll be amazing, once your child warms up to that one change, then let's gently introduce another. You're probably not in a dire situation like we were. So that's what I would suggest doing. And really why I think I'm so passionate about this is because, what we are feeding them and what they are eating is literally determining their genetic makeup, their hormonal makeup. The way their body is physically developing is depending on what we are doing. And that's a big responsibility. No, we shouldn't freak out. We should trust the Lord with our babies. We should do what we know to do and, do it in wisdom and with prayer. But it is our responsibility. We are helping these children. What we do now is determining their health as an adult. And, not to get too far down into this, but our little girls' eggs are being formed right now. Our little boys' sperms are being formed right now. How we feed them and how all of that develops is literally impacting our grandchildren. So that's me getting deep into that because this is really important to me. But I'm just saying we've been given a lot of misinformation, or we just haven't been told the whole truth. Glyphosate's safe, but we don't know how much when they say it's safe, right? That's what I'm talking about with we're not always given all the information. So it's important that we talk to each other and share the things we've learned, and help each other do this and make sure that we're raising a really healthy generation of children, right? Because we can stop some of the cycles that we're seeing of these childhood epidemics. ADHD is just rampant. And yes, I know a lot of these children are literally genetically predisposed to this, but it can be exacerbated or even caused by the food or the environment. And the obesity that we see and the behavioral issues and just, my little one, just the discontented toddlers that are just sick, right? They can't tell you have a headache or a tummy ache, but I think this is so common, at least in my small circle. Once moms get to talking, then it's I think a lot of us are dealing with the same things. So yes, I just think it's important that we're educated and we know a little more about the foods we're eating and that we're willing to take one or two small steps to helping our babies be healthy and grow up to be healthy adults. So thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know. And if it's something I've learned about, I'll help you with it. And if you have any more, if you've gone through something like this and you have information for me, I'm always wanting to learn. I read books about this all the time still and learn new things, even this weekend that I shared with you, which was super cool. So yes, I'll put links in the bottom as well for things like Azure Standard, which I think is a great resource. I even have codes for things like Thrive that I'll put down there, Thrive Market, and any of the other, I'll go back and listen. Anything else that I mentioned, I'll try to link in there. So thanks for watching, and if you have something that I said that maybe you want to talk about next time, I'll try to do this every week. So I'll see you next week. Good night.